So when we think about, or try to think about, what have been the impacts, what might be the impacts in the future of these cyber surveillance revelations upon Silicon Valley businesses, the high-tech sector in general, it's a difficult question. I'm not sure we really have a clue. It's important to remember that surveillance is not a new topic. You know, there were scandals about the FBI's surveillance activities of civil rights leaders during the 1960s. When I was debating in college, one year the national debate topic was resolved, that the gathering and utilization of non-criminal information about U.S. citizens by government agencies should be significantly curtailed. Well, that was because people were concerned about what was, for then, high-tech surveillance activities, wiretapping, and remote cameras, and the nascent development of large law enforcement databases. The Clinton administration, supported the Clipper chip in 1993. Thank God, that kind of died a quiet death. The feds wanted to build a chip into every mobile phone, every computer that would make it easy for them to read encrypted data, to break into the device. The Communications Assistance for Law Enforcement Act, CALEA, which was passed in 1994, was again another attempt by the federal government to make it possible for law enforcement agencies to listen to digital phone conversations. And it's kind of been expanded to include almost all broadband communications. There was a scandal last decade about the NSA co-locating its big data analysis servers with service provider data centers, most famously in San Francisco. So there's been repeated resurgence of this concern. And then there's kind of the mother of all surveillance revelations with Edward Snowden in June of last year. So what's different this time around? I think what's different is you actually have an NSA insider who's exposing NSA documents. It's not somebody making some allegation, here are these things that have obviously been used in presentations inside the NSA. So the NSA's response has also been pretty telling. There hasn't been much denial. He faked those documents. They've called him a traitor. Last December, the director of the NSA and the deputy director went on 60 Minutes, and it was pretty obvious part of their agenda was to denigrate the character of Edward Snowden. They revealed that they thought that he had cheated on the technical exam for getting the job at NSA. So that's been coupled with reassurances that our controls are adequate. And some people buy that. Larry Ellison says, well, show me one person whose rights have been violated. Well, it's not likely. There's nobody that's party to those violations. So I think the net effect has been a lot of credibility for this information, particularly outside the United States. Another thing that's different is just the scope of the surveillance. One federal judge in a ruling said that this was just an egregious violation of civil rights. Of course, I think the same week a different federal judge upheld the surveillance, the collecting of cell phone metadata. And also the kinds of issues that have been generated. I think some people are starting to wonder if we overreacted to 9/11. Not only in terms of a series of costly wars, but in terms of legislation like the Patriot Act. I think people are becoming much more aware of the transnational nature of voice and data communications and the infrastructure, and how it might be that data bound for Brazil actually passes through the United States, where those data centers are susceptible to co-option by the National Security Agency. And also the transnational nature of internet companies. Cisco Systems probably most famously, but a lot of internet companies and intermediary companies like Google and Yahoo are finding it more difficult to do business overseas, more scrutiny, more red tape. So these internet companies and intermediary companies have been faced with a huge PR issue as a result of this. They've scrambled to distance themselves. We weren't aware of this, or we've never, Cisco and Juniper and Huawei have all stated that they have not cooperated with the NSA to create backdoors in their products. And they've done things like Vint mentioned, encrypting data, publishing kind of aggregate information about the number of requests under FISA. But most of them are really reticent to talk about negative impacts. Even after the famous Q1 FY 2014 results call, where Chambers stated that the part of Cisco's financial problems was attributable to these revelations. They'd seen a drop of 25% in orders from Brazil and 30% in orders from Russia. And they'd seen it very quickly. Chambers said it was the fastest change he had ever seen. They had actually forecasted that in emerging markets they would see a 6% growth. And what they actually experienced was a 12% drop. And so when I talked to many people, arranging speakers for this event, and I talked to at least 5 vice presidents with Fortune 500 Silicon Valley companies, 4 of whom I knew very well, and none of them were willing to come and speak at this conference. And a couple of them were actually quite frank. Both of them were chief security officers for their companies, and they said, I'm not going to go and talk. I have to get cleared with PR and legal, and nobody's going to approve that, Mike. So even though they're expressing a lot of concern, the big boys are not yet really willing to talk about potential impacts in their results, because they don't want to affect investors. So let's talk a little bit in more detail about Cisco. I follow Cisco pretty closely. I worked 12 years at Cisco. So in June of 2013, right after the revelations, there was a posting on a Chinese website called TechWeb. They had an article in which they alleged that Cisco had helped the U.S. government spy on China and Chinese businesses through, the many Cisco routers that were used in China's internet infrastructure. And Cisco invested a lot in China. They actually had a vision for China becoming a major source of revenue. And they've seen sales in China drop fairly drastically. It's interesting that China would make such a big deal out of this because you may not know it, but if you have any kind of wide area network connections in China, you must use a state run telecommunications service provider. In addition, it is illegal to encrypt your data over those WAN circuits. I know some InfoSec organizations have their IT departments actually encrypt the data so that when the Chinese government tells them, hey, don't do that, they have a clue about where industrial espionage might be occurring. This was followed by the Q1 FY 2014 earnings call, which was in November of 2013, in which John Chambers expressed concern not only for Cisco about financial impacts because of these revelations, but also for the high-tech industry as a whole. Interestingly enough, Rob Lloyd, Cisco's president, soon after that actually started kind of backpedaling a little bit and kind of minimizing the potential impacts upon Cisco. There was a fairly famous Der Spiegel article on December 29th of 2013. That was actually pretty fascinating. Well, let me bring it up here. So this is actually the Der Spiegel website, and they had this neat interactive graphic, and if you wanted to know about particular parts of internet infrastructure that had been compromised by the NSA, you could just click on it. Oh, routers. Ah, Huawei routers. Juniper. And they also mentioned Cisco, but it's not on the graphic. Firewalls. Cisco PIX and ASA. Huawei. Juniper. So this was had a lot of repercussions in throughout the networking industry, and so you had people like, let me get the right presentation, both Cisco and Juniper responding to this. Both of them issued statements that they had not colluded with the NSA for backdoors in any of their products, that they had these strict development processes and policies in place, kind of like ISO 2001. You can make CRUD, but as long as it's well documented, it's good. Cisco actually launched what they call a PSIRT. That's Cisco's Product Security Incident Response Team Investigation, which launched on December 30th and concluded on March 23rd, and really didn't conclude much of anything. In fact, there were many security experts, networking technology experts, and members of the press who actually believed that Cisco kind of tacitly admitted, that there was, some kind of backdoor. So the direct financial impacts are really difficult to quantify, largely because of this reticence on the part of Fortune 500 companies, and I can understand the reticence, to try to develop some specificity. I'm confident that behind boardroom doors, there's been studies and people have some kind of range of estimates. But there have been some preliminary studies that have been published. One by the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation, August of last year, estimated that the global impacts upon just the cloud computing service providers would be somewhere between $21.5 billion and $30 billion through 2017. There was a Forrester research analyst commented on that and said that he believed that their findings actually pretty significantly underestimated the impacts. There was a survey executed by the Cloud Security Alliance in June and July of 2013. They polled and got about 250 responses from people outside the United States, and 59% of those people said that they were now less likely to use US-based cloud service providers because of these revelations. And in fact, 10% of those respondents had actually canceled projects with US-based cloud service providers. So there's other less direct impacts. One is the reaction of foreign governments. And this complicates an already complicated environment for transnational internet and intermediary companies. When I was at Cisco, I was deeply involved for several years with the generation of Cisco's IT infrastructure budget, which was $500 million. So it was a big budget. And one year I actually had the responsibility for all the business planning for that. It was my worst year at Cisco. And what I discovered by talking to the financial analysts was that when you look at a spreadsheet of this $500 billion budget, it's not really the spreadsheet. The spreadsheet is really a roll-up of 247 spreadsheets. And that's largely driven by the requirement to have different business entities in every country that you do business with. So that environment becomes even more complicated when those foreign governments become suspicious and skeptical about you and your services and your products. The European Union has become markedly more skeptical about U.S. companies and their involvement, willing or not, with the National Security Agency. Russia, China, and Brazil are all significantly reducing their investments with U.S. companies. Russia actually used these revelations by Der Spiegel to threaten to curtail their citizens' access to companies like Google and Yahoo and Microsoft Hotmail. So it's really complicated the situation for companies based in Silicon Valley that are truly cross-national borders. Then there are the reactions from within the U.S. government. Just last week, last Thursday, May 1st, there was a White House report issued titled Big Data, Seizing Opportunities and Preserving Values. And while this makes some suggestions about strengthening consumer privacy protection and other things that are beneficial, and does make some, it's an 85-page report, it's pretty dense reading. But a recurring theme in that is there's all these big companies that are gathering all this data about you, and we need to become much, much more aware of them. The federal government, may need to, pay more attention to this and increase regulation. And some journalists and analysts that have reacted to this are actually saying, well, this is interesting, the timing is interesting. The federal government is kind of using this to shine the spotlight away from themselves and upon, the big internet companies like Yahoo, Microsoft, Google, Facebook. So that's kind of a summary of the impacts. We'll have speakers, who have much better minds than mine that can shed more light on this. But I want to just kind of key up the speakers. So the first panel will be folks from the business community. There'll be kind of disparate views. Kenneth Clark, who was a counsel at Cloudflare and was a former policy counsel for advanced networks and access services at Google. We'll talk about potential impacts upon the cloud computing industry. I think in particular we'll be focusing a bit upon PRISM. Eric Ziegast is a distinguished systems engineer with Farsight Security. Farsight Security is a startup founded by Paul Vixie, who is an internet pioneer and for many years was the CEO of the Internet Software Consortium, which holds the intellectual rights to the software that essentially runs the DNS. And he's going to talk about surveillance. Surveillance, we tend to think surveillance equals bad. He's going to kind of try to broaden our view and understand that some kinds of surveillance and monitoring are actually good and help make the internet more secure for you and preserve your privacy rights. Then we'll have John Crane, who is the Chief Security and Stability and Resiliency Officer for ICANN, the Internet Corporation for Assigning Names and Numbers. And he'll speak about some of the technical issues that have arisen because of the cyber surveillance revelations, and also kind of clarify ICANN's role in the controversy. Then we'll have a panel comprised of a couple of folks from the press. We'll have Declan McCullough, who has reported on cyber surveillance a lot. He moderated our first conference last October. And until, not last month, but I think March, he was a senior correspondent for CNET. He's now launching a news aggregation application called Recent. Brandon Bailey has reported on this a lot. He's a technology reporter for the San Jose Mercury News, and I think occasionally for the LA Times. Am I lying, Brandon? Not usually, okay, occasional. And they'll be talking about, what have been the news stories about these revelations that they believe have had the most impact upon Silicon Valley companies. Our third panel will be folks from the public policy advocacy community. Nate Cardozo, who also spoke at our first event. He's a staff attorney for the Electronics Frontier Foundation. He heads their digital civil liberties team. So he's very expert on the topic and on what's going on in the legal community in response. Dr. Dorothy Glancy, who's a professor here at Santa Clara Law School, will speak. She has written a lot of scholarly articles on privacy rights and the internet. Emily Barabbas, who's a policy analyst with the Center for Democracy and Technology, based in San Francisco, and she's written a lot on this topic, very expert. And then finally, Blanca Gordo, who is an investigator at the International Computer Science Institute in Berkeley. She will be largely talking about the aspects of this issue that affect the digital divide. That this is yet another obstacle for people who are underserved in terms of access to the internet, in terms of their reticence and their need for additional training so that they can protect themselves on the internet. And then finally, our featured speaker, David Bren. He spoke at an interplanetary networking conference at Google headquarters in January. He's a PhD in physics. He's a world-renowned author. He has written many award-winning and best-selling science fiction novels. If you've seen the Kevin Costner movie, The Postman, he wrote that book. But he also wrote a book in 1998 called The Transparent Society: Will Technology Force Us to Choose Between Privacy and Freedom? And it was very well received. It won, a couple of prestigious awards. It's still having influence today. I would urge you to ask him about page 206 in that book. So this book was written in 1998, and I'll just summarize page 206. So he said, well, let's just suppose a terrorist pulls something off really spectacular. Let's just say they collapse the Twin Towers in New York City. What would the federal government then do? And then he goes on to kind of describe the Patriot Act. So it's kind of eerie that 3 years before the event, he kind of wrote about it. So ask him that. I'm sure you'll enjoy his response. Just say what about page 206? So we have about 10 minutes. If there are any questions, I'll entertain questions. Otherwise, we can use the setup time for our first panel. Thank you very much.